Welcome to the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC's August webinar. My name is Ryan Stewart, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Thanks for being here. I'm going to share my screen, so just bear with me for a moment. So today's topic is trail network planning, and I want to start by acknowledging that I live in the Comox Valley in Vancouver Island, and I'm grateful to live, work, and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. In the spirit of reconciliation, and on behalf of today's speaker, we will be making a donation to the Métis Nation Columbia River Society. The group advocates for the traditional values of the Métis people in the North Kootenay region. Today's webinar is part of a monthly series hosted by the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC. The ORCBC is the only unified voice for the outdoor recreation community in British Columbia. The council represents about 100 nonprofit organizations who in turn represent about 100,000 British Columbians. They're a diverse bunch, from hunting and fishing clubs to hiking and mountaineering associations, equestrian, off-road vehicle users, and many more. The ORCBC advocates for and supports the outdoor community in many ways, including with webinars like this one. We welcome you to make a donation to support the webinar and everything else the council does at orcbc.ca. A little about today's webinar. First, we are recording, and we will be sharing the recording along with keynotes, links, and other resources by email in a couple of days. So you don't need to take notes if you don't want to. After my introduction, we'll have presentations from Magi Scallion from McElhanney. A question and answer session will follow, and we'll wrap up things around 2:15 p.m. Pacific time. Feel free to pose questions in the Q&A or chat at any time. Someone may jump in and answer them. Otherwise, I will wait until the question and answer session to pose them to our panelists. I do my best to ask as many questions as I can, and I apologize in advance for any that I miss. Right after we wrap up the webinar, a super short survey will pop up in your web browser. Please stick around and take it. It helps us do a better job with these webinars and cover topics that you want to see. The reason we are all here today is to learn more about trail network planning. I never gave this a lot of thought until a couple of years ago. I live in the Comox Valley, and this spaghetti nest of trails you see here is the Cumberland Trail Network. I've lived here for about 20 years, and I've watched this trail network grow from just a couple trails to about 200 kilometers now. And I thought that was a trail network. I thought that was it. You know, I didn't think about it beyond, here are some trails and I ride around them, and that's about it. Dougal Brown opened my eyes to a more complicated and nuanced reality. The United Riders of Cumberland, the local club, hired him as their first executive director. And I was chatting with him, and he told me that one of his first tasks when he came on the job was to make the 200 kilometers of trail into a cohesive network. And it now looks like this. So I think this sort of shows that, volunteers, they went out there and they built for fun. There was no bigger picture vision of how all the trails would fit together. They just made a trail here and there and one that connected that. And they didn't think about how someone would move through the network or how different abilities would navigate from one blue trail to the next blue trail. This higher level planning is obviously critical to the user experience, and I think it's one of the intangibles that separates a great trail network from a good one. This is Magi Scallion's job, and it's her specialty. Maggie is a trail planning specialist with McElhanney, an engineering firm with offices across BC and Canada. She's based in Golden, has worked on trail network planning and master planning projects across the country for people including Parks Canada, Alberta Parks, many other government and nonprofit clubs. And she's here to tell us a bit more about her work. So I will stop sharing, and I'm going to hand things over to you, Maggie. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Can you guys see my screen okay? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks Ryan for the introduction. I'll just add on a few things. McElhanney is an engineering and geospatial geomatics firm based in Western Canada. We've got more than 35 offices and 1,500 employees across Alberta and BC. We like to describe ourselves as local everywhere, so hopefully you guys are familiar with a McElhanney office near you. Our services include engineering, geospatial, geomatics, landscape architecture, planning, and environmental. We're kind of a one-stop shop. And over the past decade, we've also added a specialty division in trails. That's my team. That has a small team. We're 8 of us, spread from Whistler to Canmore Terrace. And we're pretty diverse as well. Our team has backgrounds in business, engineering, and environmental sciences. So we have lots of different perspectives, but are united by a passion for trails. I've personally worked for McElhanney as a senior project manager since 2021 and specialized in trail planning and network design. My projects have stretched across the country and included all types of clients, from private individuals to not-for-profits and all levels of government. My background also stretches from coast to coast. I grew up in Nova Scotia and went to university in Ontario, and I've competed nationally, internationally in cross-country skiing, running, and mountain biking. I'm now retired, aka I've lost the motivation to suffer, and I've gotten more into bushwhacking, foraging, and nature appreciation. Also of note, snowmobiling and dirt biking. Why do I love trail planning? Because I absolutely adore talking to people, hearing their stories, and understanding what motivates them to be outside. I love solving problems. I'm passionate about preserving the environment and providing space for all the critters. And I believe that recreation has negative impacts on wildlife, and that's science facts. So it's nice to be able to provide space through trail planning. And then, yeah, I studied business. So I love plans and processes, efficiency, and thinking outside the box. So that's kind of who I am and who McElhanney is, and stoked to present today. Our topic is, let me see if I can advance the slide here. There we go. Trail Planning 101. So today we're just going to talk about the what, the why, and the how of trail planning. So what is trail planning? Good network planning takes strategy, intention, and a whole bunch of brainstorming, which is more than a pencil and a piece of graph paper. One of the things that I really like to highlight to I guess, new people to the concept is that there's a big difference between trail planning and trail design. We see a lot of really great trail designers that are involved in all different levels of building trails. And it's a little bit harder to come across really good trail planners. Trail planning is the more zoomed out view of what a trail network can be. Whereas trail design is a much more granular zoom. One might say that's where you're getting into the weeds. If you have problems with projects stalling out due to lack of money, support, or approval, too many trails that are all the same, too many designers at the whiteboard, rogue trail building, poor use of space, like you have too many junctions and overlapping trails, constant changing of priorities with new staff or new volunteers in your club, or a lack of approvals. Trail planning can probably help you out. I would say it is your answer. Trail planning is not writing up a wish list of what you want to do. It's critically evaluating a wish list with specific tools and metrics. Trail design still gets done, and it's still super fun. And it is the final step in the process. Whether it's the conceptual network design or a detailed alignment design, that's when you deal with the more micro issues on the ground. And that's also where you make sure you're actually delivering the trails that people want. One of the big learnings that I've had over my time at McElhanney is how often people don't realize they need a plan. We got hired by Parks Canada to do a project in Cape Breton Highlands National Park, and the project was to redesign or fix trails that had been impacted by climate change. And it was a 4 hiking trails actually in Cape Breton Highlands National Park. And one of the first steps that we had to do is understand who was using the trails. So when they got rebuilt, how do we build them? Is it, advanced hikers? Is it families? Are they going for a walk after driving the Cabot Trail? Or, what are they doing out there? And that was not a question that Parks Canada could answer for us. So that was one of the first steps in our trail design, was to kind of dig deeper into what the trail, the suite of trails in Cape Breton looked like, and how could we make these trail refurbishments be really relevant and good for the client and for the users. And I'd say that's the thing that really differentiates trail planning from just solving problems. Like when you actually come into these fix this trail situation with that desire to do well and really to deliver something that the user wants, then you can dive in a little bit deeper, backpedal a little bit, and then create a user experience that people are really looking for. In the end, of the 4 trails we were asked to fix, one of them we said cancel it because it was located in a floodplain, and there was any work that would get done to fix it, which would be a lot of money because it was in a flat area, would just have to be spent again in 5 or 10 years time when the flood came and wiped it all out again. So we just said, turn this trail into a backcountry route with minimal, no signage, and make this that kind of really backcountry rugged experience for users. It can be your double black diamond adventure. There was a trail, a short, beautiful little trail that went on this little spit out into the ocean. And it was like double wide gravel, super beautiful. And then it came to a pinch point and went down a really steep, like 30-degree grade with a whole bunch of roots and muddy side slope. So we changed that trail so that there was some switchbacks and some more views so that people could decide if they wanted to do a longer loop or not. And then anyone that was enjoying the experience of being on the double wide gravel path had that consistent experience through the whole duration of the trail. And then the other 2 trails, one of them was a quick hit, the locals' favorite. They like to go hike up it after work, but it was really quite too steep and had some sustainability issues. So we reorganized that trail so it was more sustainable, but still provided that quick hit experience. And then the longer trail, we significantly redesigned and added in more loops so that people weren't getting in over their head, as they tended to do on that trail, thinking that it would be a quick little hike up to a viewpoint and then overexerting themselves. So that was something where we got hired to do design, but we really had to backpedal and turn it more into a planning exercise. So why should you have a trail plan? Trail plans lead to legitimacy, money, and succession planning. And a trail plan done well can provide stability for an organization because you can focus your energy on getting money to construct trails, expand community support and stewardship, and actually build the trails. That's the end result of having a trail plan. You get to do all the fun stuff that you signed up to do anyway. A well-written and comprehensive trail plan can address community concerns and provide data to support grant applications. That's one of the great reasons to get a trail plan with all the text up front. When you do a trail plan well and you include an environmental assessment, that can help reassure land managers that recreational use will have minimal negative impacts, or at least avoid the maximal negative impacts. And then other things like collecting user data through surveys or cell phone data or counters on the trails, all that kind of stuff can be used to estimate economic impacts, community use of trails, and really support grant funding when you're looking at building new trails. So trail plans really provide opportunities beyond just those lines on a map. Good trail planning should unite the vision of clubs, individuals, governments, and First Nations. So it's an opportunity to make sure you guys are all pulling in the same direction. It's a great way to think beyond the network. So when we start trail planning, we often start outside of where the trail network is going to be, and we think about access points, routes through the network, where people live, and how they're going to get to the trailhead, and what other networks exist in the area. So we don't want to recreate an experience that already exists unless it's really far away. So making sure that we totally understand what the whole fabric of the area is. Trail plans will provide clear next steps. So you know at the end of the planning process what you're going to do next. And then after that, until the to-do list is completed. Trail planning will support needs for permitting and approvals, as I mentioned, and also it should make getting funding easier. I worked at the Canmore Nordic Center for 4 years, and I was told that we couldn't have a trail plan because we never knew what government budgets were going to do. And every year there was this period called March Madness, and it was in March, surprise, surprise. And that's when there was any surplus money was redistributed in the government, and we would spend irrationally on things we didn't need. When I arrived there was something like hundreds and hundreds of pieces of pressure treated 6x6 that had been bought one March just in a pure panic. And so I pushed really hard in this government structure to have a plan so that when March Madness rolled around, we had some shovel-ready projects that we could fund instead of just irrationally buying things that might help us out in the future. And yeah, once we had that plan in place, we were able to start checking things off the to-do list and improving that trail network, and actually improving a lot of the infrastructure that went to supporting the trail network, such as groomers and all those types of things that need to get replaced. I have to give a shout out to Matt Hadley, who I work with, for this lovely 4-legged stool. And kind of the theme of the stool with sustainable trails and sustainable trail networks is that you really need to be balancing the social, which is the people, the physical, which is the trail tread, the sustainable trail tread, ecological, which is kind of everything in the surrounding environment, from the critters and plants to waterways and preserving the environment, and also managerial. So making sure that your land managers and funders are also happy. So trail plans should strive to create this sense of balance. A stool with only 3 legs or 2 is definitely not as stable or nice to sit on. And Matt also was leading the Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park trail planning process, which started in 2016. And so in 2016, and this is 2016 dollars, they spent about $36,000 for a mountain bike trail plan, which Matt and Justin Ellis wrote. And then the following year, there was probably another $15,000 or $20,000 spent on an equestrian and cross-country ski trail plan that complemented the mountain bike trail plan. And as a result of these 2 plans being developed in the government realm in Alberta Parks, the government has now spent more than $2 million and built more than 60 kilometers of new trail in that park. And it's all off that original plan. And it's been supported through government means. And then also when grants are available, they leverage the local mountain bike club to apply for grants and then authorize the club to do the work within the park. So it's really quite a big success story of a trail plan leading to really tangible, significant outcomes. And if you have never been mountain biking in Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park, I recommend you go in March or April. It's in southeastern Alberta, so you probably think I'm not telling the truth, but it's an absolutely fabulous trail network down there now, and they have quite an early spring. They also have the highest concentration of cougars in Western Canada, I believe. So take your bear spray. So how do you develop a trail plan? This is where I go through some tips and tricks, but mostly that's my phone number. Call me. So we have developed this kind of pyramid idea for trail planning. And with the basic pyramid math is that you need to build a strong foundation first. So you need to do engagement. You need to have professional observations, not personal opinions. And you need to understand, it's called background review there in the pyramid, but it's basically the legislative landscape, existing plans, and stuff like that. Most people think that trail planning is phasing and recommendations, but you need to get to those phasing recommendations in a defensible way. And that's the base of this pyramid. So when we talk about engagement and understanding trail users, you can use surveys, focus groups. We do a lot of interviews with key players. Tourism studies can shed a lot of light, as well as cell phone data. And this is something that McElhanney is getting more and more into with the cell phone data, because we can see where people live through the cell phone data, and then also how and when they're using the trails. It's quite granular data, so you're not getting very concise use numbers. They have to be balanced out against things like traffic counters or other counting methods, but it gives a really good idea of where people are going within your trail network and what they're looking for. I should also highlight that when you're doing the engagement, you need to be engaging not only your trail users, but also landscape users. It's pretty hard to avoid places in British Columbia where there's hunting or other interests on the land that don't necessarily use trails, forestry, mining, and whatnot. And those uses are also very important to consider, because it will impact how you use the land base that you have available for trail development. Resources for background review, you can consider regional land use plans. A lot of those are super dated. Some areas in British Columbia, you also have backcountry recreation access plans, which can come in very handy. That's kind of like a zoning of the backcountry. And if you're in a more municipal setting, or even if you're not, things like official community plans and tourism strategies and whatnot, those all provide really great information on what is important to your community and what's allowed and not allowed in different areas. And then professional observations. We rarely do a trail plan without having a site visit go hand in hand with it. And that's so that we can look at how sustainable are your trails, or how safe are your trails? Do you have directional trails? What is the mix of users on your trails? And also, what does your trail inventory look like? Or do you only have blue trails? Do you have an appropriate mix of green, blue, and black? And things like that. So when we do trail planning, typically what happens is we try and do our engagement, our background review, and our professional observations almost separately. Like we'll have 3 different people leading the different parts of that. And then we have a meeting where we all get together and we talk about the different themes we observed in each of our kind of realms of interest. And those themes that align are typically what start forming the recommendations that appear in the trail plan. We've worked on a number of very interesting plans lately. We did a trail plan for Mount 7 in Golden for the cycling club, as well as one for the Golden Off-Road Motorcycle Association for a new dirt bike trail network. And those are very interesting to hear what the community wanted, which was no changes, our trails are awesome. And then the professional observations were that there were some safety concerns with junctions or some sustainability issues. And so we had to find ways to maintain the experience that users wanted, which tended to be steep and scary, while also addressing things that could make the clubs liable in the case of an incident or an accident. So that's always fun times, and it's really tricky when maybe your engagement outcomes don't align with your professional observations, and then how do you create a situation that the club can buy into so far as outcomes. And then I just wanted to talk about some of the tools that we use really extensively in trail planning. They're not necessarily part of the process, but they're really helpful things when you're trying to understand your network and your user experiences. So we have, and I apologize for the blurriness of this graphic. I couldn't find a really good one. Typically have it on a small piece of paper, but trail classification, like you'll see this often with like rec sites. They'll have type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 trails, as does Parks Canada. We prefer to have a slightly more detailed trail classification because we put this into like a GIS database or spreadsheet, and then that really helps us analyze the inventory of a trail network on a few different levels. So I'll just quickly run through these. So trail type is a trail, a summer trail, a winter trail, or an all-season trail. So then you can understand use throughout the year and potential conflicts associated with use. We use mode of travel to describe whether a trail is non-motorized, mechanized, motorized, or mixed use. Mountain biking would be considered mechanized, just for your references. Use type would be single use, multi-use, or preferred use. A preferred use trail is a trail that has a design guideline for a specific user type. So a flow trail would be probably single use for mountain bike, whereas tech flow might be more preferred use for mountain bike, but allowable use for pedestrian. Level of development. So the level of development really flows into something that we call recreation setting. So a recreation setting is whether your trail's in the urban location, mid-country, front country, back country, what have you. And we like to make sure that the level of development of the trail matches the recreation setting. So a trail that's located in the back country, you'd want to be minimally developed because you want people to have that backcountry experience without too much sensory overload. Whereas a trail in a more urban setting or in a busier trail network, you're going to want that to be developed. Activity types are pretty straightforward. That's mountain bike, hike, trail run, equestrian, dirt bike, snowmobile, snowshoe. And then we have difficulty level and the design parameters. So I'll get into what design parameters are in a moment, but those are typically what actually defines the difficulty level or physically describes it from a trail design perspective. The other tool that we use extensively is from the Bureau of Land Management. In 2017, they have a document that the name escapes me right now, but anyway, this comes from the Bureau of Land Management and it's fantastic. These are trail user objectives. And they distilled the reasons why people use trails down into this short list of user objectives. And I find these very, very useful when I'm trying to describe what users are looking for in a trail or in a trail network. And so there's things like solitude. So some people like me, we don't want to see other people on the trail. So that's one of my major objectives. Similar challenge. or exercise are common objectives for me. I like to get out there by myself, do my thing, and then go home. Whereas other objectives are things like efficiency, which might become more prevalent in a climbing trail for a gravity assisted network, where you really just want to go up that trail so that you can go down a more fun trail. So what you're looking for there is efficiency. It also pops up a lot in active transportation. People aren't looking for switchbacks or viewpoints. They want to go from home to work. Well, no one wants to do that. You want to go from work to home. So that's where trail user objectives come in, and we try to define these for every trail in a network, as well as at a network level. Another tool that we use are these trail management objectives and design parameters. So we, through our professional observations, will develop a trail management objective, a TMO, for each trail in a network. And that is basically the summary of the trail classification with a few things like trail user objectives thrown in. We build this out into our GIS database. We use ArcGIS Online. So each of our trail lines has all these fields within it. And then those can be exported into a table or left within the trail line, but it creates a really nice reference point for trail planning. And it's a great way to filter and slice and dice and understand different volumes of trails within a network. And finally, these design parameters, you'll also see them as kind of difficulty rating definitions. We like to, I guess, use or develop our own rec sites, and Trails BC also has a complete set of design parameters in their rec manual for all the different modalities of use. This is a mountain bike example right here, but they also have design parameters for hiking and cross-country skiing and a whole bunch of stuff. We've found some of the modalities or trail user types, their design parameters aren't super great anymore. So sometimes we like to tweak them in trail plans just so that they're suitable for the area of use and the mix of users. Yeah, so I guess one of the things that we've really noticed coming down in the land of trail planning with themes and observations, one of the biggest things is that there's less land and more users. So trail planning has become less about drawing lines on a blank slate. It's more about trying to wrangle a bunch of lines into some semblance of something that makes sense. And it's not so terrible when we're dealing with preferred use networks, but integrating different modalities or different trail user types into one network can be very challenging. And we've had a number of projects over the past year where we've been integrating mountain bike use into existing cross-country ski networks. And that's been challenging to design junctions where people will typically gather that are safe. And also recognizing that fat biking is becoming more popular. So you need to really be considering winter use of the mountain bike trails and winter use of the cross-country ski trails. And keeping users apart, because cross-country skiers, and I am one, we don't like mountain bikers or snowshoers on the cross-country ski trails, much less walkers. So it's really important to make sure that there's no way for unwanted users to access or accidentally not understand where they're going. And then also rec sites and Trails BC is very busy these days and a little bit over capacity, and getting new trails authorized is not easy. So a lot of trail planning and trail development is how to make use of what you already have and how to keep it refreshed and what that means. We're seeing a lot of projects coming down the pipe where whole trail networks have been burned down in a forest fire, or damaged by flooding. And so again, it's making sense of an existing network and reusing what can be reused, and then envisioning new ways of making those trails into a network again, but also making them climate smart. We're doing a big project right now with Trans Canada Trail. They're developing a climate smart handbook. So that's definitely something that's at the front of everyone's mind. And then this is not exactly new. It's been around, I'd say, for quite a while now, but having accessible and inclusive trails and doing appropriate consultation and trail planning hand in hand with First Nations, and doing all of that in an authentic manner. Like, you can't hire a consultant to engage with First Nations on your behalf if you want to be doing it well. You need to be beating the pavement yourself, and consultants can help you and help provide materials for you, but you need to be making those personal connections as the trail managers and land managers. We are working on some projects in Nova Scotia right now where the archaeological requirement is a test pit every 5 meters on the trail tread. And that is quite an expensive undertaking for the trail builder, but it's something that is potentially coming down the pipe everywhere, where there's a need and a want to understand more about the land that we're using, and also to design and plan trails hand in hand with traditional and historical uses of an area. This is switching from trail planning 101 to business 101, but the secret to success is execution. And you can have the best plan in the world, but if it sits on a shelf and gathers dust, it's not a great trail plan at all. It's a complete failure. So you need to make sure that your trail plans have timelines, budgets, and commitment. Commitment to getting the work done in an organized fashion and sticking to it. Trail plans can also be enhanced with a communications plan. So letting people know that you've had the trail plan done, that there's exciting new things coming down the pipe. That always helps, and it helps build momentum and support as well. I'd say the hardest part of my job is seeing trail plans that are abandoned, whether it's new boards at volunteer clubs, no money to do the work, or a whole multitude of other reasons. It really sucks because we love planning and designing trails. It's what we do. It's like our absolute passion. And so when we put a piece of ourselves into a trail plan and we see it just under a pile of dust, it's really, really hard to deal with that. We like to say push dirt, not paper. And hopefully the trail plan helps you get there. Yeah, so that's it for me. I guess we'll have some questions. I will say though, if you want to email me, my email address is there, but you can also email trails@mcelhanney.com, and that goes to our whole team. And you can get a variety of answers.
Awesome. Maggie, thank you so much. There's so much information in there. We'll just move right over to the Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions for Maggie, they can put them in the Q&A or the chat. Maybe I'll just start with one. Like there was a lot there. It sounds like a much more complicated process than I would ever have imagined. So what would you say is maybe, one of the big challenges or the hard things that people underestimate or don't think about when they kind of go into this process? What are the ones that you see kind of repeating?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see is people either don't have enough money to undertake a proper trail planning process, or they really want to cut corners. And so like we often hear, oh, we don't need to do engagement because we did a club survey 3 years ago. And fair enough. there's definitely information that can be gleaned from that club survey. But I think it's really important to build that foundation of the pyramid and not cut those corners, and do the job right, I guess, because that's really what's going to make your plan successful in the long run, and that engagement will lead to community support, as well as supporting the kind of communications plan that'll support the execution of the trail plan.
So can you give a sense of, what that budget might look like, and the kind of resource commitment that a group should have in mind going into a process like this?
Yeah, I would say in this day and age, the minimum amount of funding you need to get a trail plan is about $30,000 with most consultants. For a smaller network, like let's say 15 to 20 kilometers of trail in a kind of single area. Whereas right now we're working on the Canmore Area Trail Strategy, which is a huge project. It's over, I think there's something like 6,000 trails or something in the project area, or it's hundreds and hundreds of kilometers anyhow. And that the fees on that are closer to $500,000 with all the environmental review and numerous stages of engagement. So yeah, the sky's the limit. But well, actually the sky is not the limit. You can only spend so much money on a trail plan before it gets ridiculous.
That sounds like a huge project, trying to gather all of that for such an immense network and such a busy corridor. That for kind of those smaller networks, smaller groups, resource wise, the number of people that will need to be sort of involved on that volunteer network, or the executive, like how human resource intensive is this process, even if you are hiring a consultant to do kind of that more detailed work?
That's a really great question. And I think it's kind of up to let's say the client. If it's a volunteer club, many hands make light work, but it also makes an absolute nightmare for the consultant. It's nice to have a point person to deal with. But really, truly, there's typically not that much work to be done unless there's work that the club wants to, or the client wants to do themselves. So sometimes they'll want to execute the survey in their own survey tool, or contact all the people and wrangle them for club meetings and interviews and whatnot. Or clubs that have very good existing GIS databases, we can often leverage that type of information and minimize our research in the field, stuff like that. But it can also be very hands-off. Like, we're busy, you do you, keep us posted, we'll chat every 2 weeks for half an hour.
All right, we got a question in the chat here from Ian Lowe. He's asking, is a trails plan and a trails master plan the same thing? And in your opinion, who should be leading and funding the master planning process?
Yeah, I use trail plan and trail master plan interchangeably. I also occasionally pluralize trail and into trails master plan. Sometimes I say trail master plan, but I would say it's all effectively the same thing with the same deliverable and the same process. I think that the group that is going to be maintaining and developing the trails should lead the process. Alternatively, the land manager, but I find if the land manager is not actively engaged in trail maintenance and trail work, there tends to be not as good buy-in from the club, and it's a plan that collects dust.
All right. And someone else asked, just to confirm, that McElhanney does trail design and layout work as well as the planning?
Yeah, we do everything except for construction. So the suite of work we do goes from trail planning to conceptual design. We can support permitting. Obviously, we have an environmental team as well. Structural, we do bridge design, all that kind of stuff. And then we do trail detail design. We often assist, especially government clients, with procurement. So we'll write up clauses for contracts, all the drawings, technical drawings for trails, the alignments, the TMOs, all that kind of stuff. And for some of, well, actually now for more and more clients, we also do construction administration, where we support the procurement of a trail building contractor. We oversee their work in the field with a number of inspections, and we authorize the release of payments to that contractor just to make sure the trail is actually constructed to the design standard. It's quite common for that to be done with highways and the things that municipal and government clients are used to. So when we work with municipal and different government clients with trail building, we're often hired kind of as a client rep through the construction process.
Right. All right. Um, James Rogers wondering about river and water trails. Have you worked on anything in that realm, in that planning sort of idea? Any tips or tricks you can sort of offer there?
That's a great question, and I am frothing to work on some Blue Ways plans. Personally, I have not, other than some work we've done with the TCT, just with connectivity and stuff. But members of my team, including Matt Hadley, have worked on one in northern Alberta, a really long Blue Way, and I believe also some Blue Way and portage routes in British Columbia. And we're actually working on one right now in Alberta in an area called Lakeland, where it's a canoe route and there's portage routes, and we're working on the physical sustainability of those portage routes.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So do you have any advice for groups as they work through the sort of that engagement process of how to get everybody on side, like you were talking about that Mount 7 situation, and sort of managing these different user groups and what they're looking for, and then what is safe. And so is there anything there that you can sort of help with tips or advice?
Yeah, I think that to think that you're going to get everybody on side is a little bit naive. There'll always be opponents to any plan, even if it's the best plan in the world, or components of the plan. And that's just something that when you're working through a plan, you need to be okay with, and you need to understand which battles you want to lose and which you can't lose. So I think that going into any planning process with a grain of salt is really important. And then I also think, and obviously I'm a consultant, so I'm biased, but that having external support, especially through the engagement process, is really important, because oftentimes in small communities, people can hear each other, but they don't listen to each other. And so you get into scenarios where there's so much existing bias that people can't actually hear what the other person's values are or what they need and what they want. They just hear the negative bits and pieces. So it's really nice to have an outsider come in and facilitate those discussions or do those interviews and interpret the outcomes and then push them together, because a lot of times everybody loves being outside. We love the trails. We have the same values. Like, no one's out there thinking they want to like get rid of all the grizzly bears because it's wrecking their trail experience. Like, we're all kind of the same. We love the outdoors. And so it's just a matter of wording things in such a way that people can see the overlap and understand that they have shared values.
Yeah, I thought that sort of resonated with the part you were mentioning earlier about sort of not going on finding actual data rather than going on the assumptions, like, oh, this is how people use this trail. These are the people that are out there that I see when I go out there. So that's the way it is. Like we do sort of have that natural sort of tendency to just be like, this is the way it is because it's what I've seen.
Yes. I have a great example. One of my former colleagues, Ted Morton, he told me this. I don't know if he's the one that figured it out or if it's just hearsay from him too, but it's from Sun Peaks. And they interviewed users and they said, question one, describe your riding ability. And everybody's like, I am a sick black diamond rider. I like the gnarliest stuff. And then another question was, what's your favorite trail? And everybody's favorite trail was like a blue flow. And so it kind of goes to show that you need to ask a variety of questions to really understand the user. And that sometimes users don't even understand themselves.
I think that is so true of us all. We often don't quite even have that nuance of, oh, actually, no, I do like it every now and then to scare myself, but most of the time I'd rather just have it nice and fun. I'm just gonna grab some questions here. If your trail plan is complete, would you recommend getting a detailed design plan for the whole project, if feasible, or doing smaller sections all the way through construction first? Does it matter from your perspective?
Yes, it does matter. I highly recommend. So typically you can get grants for planning. So get a grant, do the planning. Then when you have approval, you go through the permitting process, you have approval to build a trail and you're getting a grant or funding to build the trail. You can include in that grant the cost of detailed design and the cost of construction administration. So I think it's way smarter to do detailed design as part of construction and then also include in the construction oversight or what have you. I also highly recommend that you separate the church from the state in that. So when you do design build projects, there's tons of builders who are really great designers as well. But there's often the opportunity to cut corners when the budget's getting a bit low or ground conditions are unpredictable and they need to change things. So I feel like you typically get a slightly better trail that the client is more comfortable with when you separate the design and the build.
All right. I may just get you to stop sharing your screen there, just have that open up a little more. We have a question here. How do you balance trail usership with trail sustainability, i.e. closing down a popular trail due to unsustainability, or maybe, like you were mentioning, wildlife. We did a last webinar was recreation ecology, and we learned a lot about those sorts of conflicts between humans and wildlife. So how do you kind of approach those topics?
Yeah, so I think it is so important to consider wildlife and just to recognize that recreation has negative impacts on the environment. Even if you're just walking, you're out there, you're disturbing animals. And so that's where this is another optional budget thing, but the more information you have on the environment that the trails are going to be in, the better the plan can be. There's also guidelines around designing and planning trails to minimize conflict with wildlife. So just avoiding areas where they want to be, providing good sight lines, providing shelter areas off the trails where animals can hide out when humans walk by. I strongly believe that we don't need trails everywhere. We need to leave vast pieces of land that are completely untouched. And that also leads me to suggest that we need to have more trail networks that have mixed types of use and also mixed modalities. So whether it's mixing motorized, like dirt bikes and mountain bikes with really intentional junction design, but making more use of smaller pieces of land so that we can leave more space for the animals. And I think also when we lay in forestry on top of that and all these other things that occur on the land base, like imagine that you could have 40 acres of pristine forest that you can have a few different recreation types in. and that's never going to get logged. Like that'd be pretty sick, as opposed to 200 acres that all gets logged at some point.
And from the unsustainability side, I mean, do you approach it any other way? So if a trail's not built in a way that's sort of holding up to the weather or the use, um, is there a way that you approach those situations?
Yeah, that also comes down a little bit to like the design parameters and the trail user objectives. So, and you have to think about like use today and use tomorrow, and the fact there's going to be more users. So you need to design trails. Often we get people be like, oh, not many people live here, so we don't need like a really good trail. And the answer is, well, it doesn't matter how many people are on the trail. A sustainable trail is designed and built the same way. Um, yeah, so you just need to have those principles. And I am an advocate for decommissioning and getting rid of sustainability issues, because sustainability issues, erosion on a trail tread, if it's anywhere near water, then you get sedimentation in streams and it impacts fish. Like, sorry, it might be fun to skid down a steep trail, but it does have impacts. And there's ways to mitigate that. You can harden the trail, you can put in direction changes so that the water doesn't speed up as much and run as far when it goes off the trail. There's different ways to mitigate these things, but I don't think it's acceptable in this day and age for trails to be planned, built, or continue to exist that are causing damage.
Yeah, it seems to me a lot of trails, once you have those sort of erosion points in them, there's not much that it can ever be done to sort of really stop that on a sustainable way. It seems to be a chronic issue that you can fix for a bit, rock harden or whatever, but it eventually sort of needs more maintenance, falls apart again, whatever.
Yeah, or a significant, I say significant reroute, but it's then a
Yeah.
lot of like putting in grade reversals and nicks and other features just to make the water shed more frequently so it doesn't speed up.
Just to take a jump back there to where you were talking about protection, how does having a trail plan like this, like something formal, help with, say, protecting a trail network that maybe doesn't have a designation or a protection at this point? How does that play into that, and how can that help with that process of, say, I love my trails, I want to, ensure that they're always there. So how can these two sort of fit together?
Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet, and I don't think there's a really great way to save things that haven't been authorized in the appropriate manner prior to building. But I think that having a trail plan, especially one that dives in a little bit more into user engagement and study and professional observations, like with an environmental assessment, can do a lot to support the continuation or the non-decommissioning of a trail network. Um, just in the sense of, oh, this many people use the trails, it's a community asset, people want it to stay. We can voluntarily close certain trails at certain times of the year to protect calving moose or whatever it is. There'll definitely be compromises in a lot of cases, but I think that getting the science and the study behind your request and reasoning is a great start.
All right. There are a couple questions here, just kind of related to, where to learn more. Are there any books or resources, funding sources, things like that you would sort of off the top of your head that you can recommend to people?
Yes, but also not off the top of my head.
We can follow up on
Uh,
that too, if that's easier. If
yeah,
I'll just include that, maybe we can touch base afterwards, and if you think of a few, we can pass them out with the email with the recording. Um,
totally.
One that I think you touched on there briefly, the accessibility aspect. There's a lot of work being done. I see out there lots of groups kind of looking at that, how to make their trails more accessible, whether it is for sort of the bowhead style, wider bikes, or if it's even just thinking of a larger spectrum of society making their trails accessible to them. How would you suggest groups go about sort of that process of thinking about that and looking at their trail network and how they can sort of implement a more accessible approach to what they're doing?
Yeah, I think first of all, understand who your potential users are. Obviously, you can't predict if someone's going to have a spinal cord injury, uh, or how many people in your community will. But like, I would say start with existing demand. Um, we have an accessible trail in Golden that I don't think is ever used by anyone on accessible bikes. It's great for kids though. So if you think about like dual purpose, like, oh, I can build a trail that's suitable for bowheads. I can groom it in the winter for fat biking, and parents can go ride with their kids on strider bikes or learning to bike. That's awesome. I wouldn't launch into a huge accessibility project if you don't have a reason to, other than the fact there's grant money available. It's a little bit inauthentic. Um, and then sometimes too, you can create a really wonderful network just by communicating better and understanding what you have. And rather than building a whole new trail, maybe it's just tweaking existing trails. Matt, who I work with, has really given us a perspective on accessibility. He lost his leg in an accident 5 years ago-ish. And so for him, he really needs to know what to expect on a trail. Like, how steep are the grades? What are the obstacles like? How much exposure is there? And that type of stuff, like maybe making your trails more accessible is simply putting really great descriptions in trail forks. Because then
Yeah.
people can make educated decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know bridges are a big one with those sorts of like the width of the axle, and so if the bridge is not wide enough, then everything else on the trail could be totally easily for them to clear. But if there's this one bridge they can't get over it, it's impossible, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, a really interesting challenge I think for the trail community going forward is figuring out how to communicate exactly that sort of information so that people know, oh yeah, this is something I might be able to do or not. So,
Yeah. I'm
um,
a huge advocate for uh replacing all signage with QR codes and then dumping everything into a website.
yeah, yeah.
Read what you want.
Um, we're getting close to the end of time here, so I'll wrap up with one last question for you. I think it's a conundrum facing a lot of trail networks, and something that you mentioned earlier, just the idea that, as a trail user, I'm always excited about a new trail and about going further and somewhere new and all that sort of stuff. But the capacity of a lot of trail managers to maintain infrastructure is sort of already maxed in a lot of situations. The provincial government's willingness to authorize new infrastructure is pretty minimal at this point. So, for groups out there that want to improve and evolve their trail networks, make them feel kind of fresh and new, what are some things they can do? What can we do out there to sort of keep that new and interesting aspect to our trail networks without actually expanding them?
Yeah, I think that as your trail networks evolve, people's favorite trails evolve typically, right? You get a new trail, everyone rides it, they love it. They don't do their old favorite trail anymore. That old favorite trail is probably prime candidate for a mega refresh. And I think that the best thing that we can all get used to is ripping that band-aid off and planning regular refreshes of existing trails. And that can be everything from changing a climb trail into a greener blue flow and putting, changing an old tech trail into the climb. Um, Typically small reroutes are totally doable, but I think rather than trying to build new trails, focus on getting rid of the garbage.
Yeah, good advice. Never sounds quite as exciting though, does it?
No, and yeah, I mean, I get it. It's not as fun, but I think that's unfortunately the way of the future. So if before you go to bed at night, every night you say, I love refreshing crappy old trails, maybe maybe by next year you'll be excited about it.
Awesome. Maggie, thanks so much. Thanks for being here and sharing all your knowledge. I'm just going to share my screen again. Um, This webinar was part of a monthly series. September's webinar topic is really relevant to what we've been talking about today, and there were a few questions in the chat there about it. It's focused on collecting and analyzing trail and visitor information on a DIY sort of do-it-yourself level. We'll have Michelle Archie from Harbinger Consultancy, and they'll teach us about some of the tools that you can use to conduct visitor research. You can find out more about that webinar when it comes up on our newsletter and at our website. And the best way to stay in touch with everything the ORCBC is doing is through that newsletter. You can sign up online at orcbc.ca. There's also a donate now button on there if you want to support the ORCBC's work. Reminder, we'll be sending out a link to a recording of this webinar along with key takeaways and resources and that we were just talking about in the next few days. And please stick around for a survey. It'll pop up right after we finish here. It's a great place to let us know about anything you wish we'd cover today and any topics you'd like us to tackle in the future. With that, I'll let you all go. I hope you have a great afternoon. And thanks again, Maggie. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge and being here today. All right, thanks.